Yes, 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 yes.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. This is a special activity, seminars in signal process on cardiology, sponsored by University of São Paulo Medical School, as part of the activities involving the preparation of Computing in Cardiology Conference to be held here in next September. Today, we have three speakers: Professor João Salinet from University of ABC, Professor Olivier Meste, Université Cote, France, and Professor Jean-Phillippe Couderc, University of Rochester, United States. Professor Olivier and Jean-Phillippe are also members of the Board of Directors of Computing in Cardiology, so very important people visiting us. Thank you to visit São Paulo and especially our university. We scheduled half an hour presentations, following at the end with a round table with questions from the audience. These seminars are also being transmitted and broadcast by YouTube, provided by Brazilian Society of Biomedical Engineering, SBEB. So thank you to SBEB to provide this research for us. Let's start, because you have a very tight time to use this theater. So I'd like to invite Professor João Salinet to start with his presentation. Thank you.
Good morning. I would like to thank Professor Marcos Gutierrez for the opportunity given to be here today through the medicine school. I'm going to update a little bit about the computer in cardiology that is going to be held here in São Paulo. It's a conference that occurs since 1974. It offers us foreign scientists and professionals in the field of engineering, medicine, physics, and computer science into a collaborative network to allow advances on clinical cardiology and cardiovascular cardiology. These are the places in previous years and never have been in South America, in Latin America. It's a great honor to have this opportunity to host the conference. We have the CinC community here. Thank you for the board. Thank you to all members that has been helping us to make it through. Just some details from previous years. Last year was a record in terms of attendance. And we can see in previous years in the United States, more than 350 attendees. It's vary a little bit, but we can see that it's always above 300 people is what we expect here. And the goals of hosting this conference here is to incentivize Latin American Brazilian community in this international society. And then it's the first time in history. We are very happy with that. We are working hard to make this event as good as possible. And it is going to be between 14 and 17 on September, starting on Sunday, in this theater here with the Sunday Symposium, where scientists from Brazil is going to present some trending topics that we have been developed. And this is the venue. Here where we are going to have Sunday Symposium here. Also, we are going to have the Physionet Hackathon in a workshop that at INCOR with the help of Professor Marcos Gutierrez, and Monday to Wednesday, the section is going to be the Rebouças Convention Center. Yeah. As I mentioned, the PhysioNet Hackathon is going to be at Heart Institute, and here we are going to host the Sunday Symposium, and then the other sections during the rest of the event is going to be the Convention Center. We have four hotels, official hotels. Yeah. São Paulo has 3 airports. Yeah. We have connection to all of the world. Yeah. And this up to now we have 6 sponsors, and the event is endorsed by ASC Working Group Cardiology, MICAE, and SBEB. On Saturday, for the first time, we were going to have a city tour with integrative activity on Ibirapuera Park. On Monday afternoon, we are going to visit the Caminho do Mar Park with several different activities to the attendees that they are going to choose during the registration, where the early bird is the end of June. Also, in the same place, we are going to have Brazilian culture workshops. And then, when it starts by the end of the day, around 6 p.m., we are going to go to this restaurant that is nearby to the park to have the gala dinner. Yeah. On Tuesday afternoon, we are going to have visiting the MASP, and after that, we're going to have a happy hour. And I'm grateful to have such good partners to make this event true, and thank you very much. This is our social medias. Please access that, and we are quite happy to answer any possible questions that and see you soon. Yeah. Today we're supposed to have another international member giving the talk, but he could not come along to Brazil. And then we decided to have a presentation to introduce what's atrial fibrillation. That is going to be further discussions by these 2 specialists. And then, and why atrial fibrillation is important, and why we are going to spend almost all morning here discussing that. Yeah? One of the reasons, we have several reasons, but one of those is the most common arrhythmia in clinical practice. Yeah? And what does it mean? Is if you ask a cardiologist during a constance, if they attend 20 people per day, the majority is going to have atrial fibrillation. Yeah? And then, okay, that's fine. But what's the problem behind that? The problem is that it increases with the age. Yeah? And you go to the hospital for long periods of your life, reducing your quality of life. And for certain groups of patients, the treatment is not efficient yet. And research has been done for more than 100 years to try to improve that. We have got across the decades a lot of advantages, but still room to improvements. And what happens during atrial fibrillation is that the atrial doesn't pump effectively, and even the 20% of blood that is pumped by the contraction can cause impact the quality of life, increasing the chances of stroke in 2 to 5-fold. Yeah, in overall, up to 2% of population has that, and it is associated with other morbidities, and also you increase the mortality of that. And then here we have on your right, is your left, what we expect in sinus rhythm as we are now, and on the right is the atria is beating too fast. The AV nodes help to hold a little bit, not everything go to the ventricle, doing slow conduction, but even though you increase to three-fold the heart rate during fibrillation, and the pump doesn't, the chamber doesn't empty, and then it can create clots that can propagate to the cardiovascular system, increase the chances of AVC. Okay, there is several mechanisms behind that. When you have this arrhythmia in early stages, the treatment is more efficacious, the mechanism is more clear. The problem is when you become, you hold this arrhythmia for a long time where your heart is remodeled. And this is the challenge of this disease, is where my group have been working on that. And also, these mechanisms can interplay simultaneously, making it even harder. Yeah? And then some of the treatments, there is no pharmacological treatments that guide clinicians to decide where to ablate. But this equipment doesn't take into account the complexity of the arrhythmia and then making difficult success treatment for who has this arrhythmia for long periods. Yeah. Okay, there's some CLACS mechanism, ectopic activity, single entry, multiple wave entry, but in the last 10, 15 years, another mechanism was found out, helping silicon models, animal models, also observed in humans later on. Yeah. And what are the symptoms? How do I know that I do have atrial fibrillations? You can have some palpitations, fatigue, shortness of breath, dizziness, chest pain. This is the prevalence of atrial fibrillation. Yeah, when you have less than 40s, you have a lower chance. But if you increase your age, you have a higher prevalence of having that. If you have a not healthy activities, you might get a higher chance to get that. Right? And what is the risk of factors? Age plays an important risk on that. There's a relation between that, because with the age, you increase the presence of interstitial tissues between the cells, favoring fibrosis, dilatation. Heart disease also increase the risk. Diabetes, alcohol, and stimulants as overall. Hypertension, obesity, of course, family history, obstructive sleep apnea, valvopathy. You have different influences that can even increase the susceptibility of developing atrial fibrillation. What does it mean that young people with no previous history diseases can have it? Athletes can have it. Sometimes we see in the footballs players that they underwent treatments like catheter ablation. Yeah. And lifestyle modifications due to this arrhythmia. Yeah. You need to change your dietary. You need to do regular exercises to manage your weight, reducing alcohol, low stress if possible. You can use medications, and you need a strict control of blood pressure. Well, in persistent fibrillation is people that has IF episodes for long periods where you interrupt that by mechanical, pharmacological, or therapeutic procedures. In general, what can happen. You have a remodeled atria, where fibrosis starts to play important roles, changing the velocity of propagation from different waves, creating obstacle that can favor wave front collisions and then developing atrial fibrillation. Of course, if you increase the size of your atria, you favor having more circuits, hand-with circuits. The hypertension, as we mentioned, heart failure, help structure changes in the atrium. You have key signaling pathways and therapeutic targets where you offer potential identification of the key areas to target then is currently the main procedure used. For us here in Brazil, it's a quite expensive procedure. Maybe around 20% of the treatments in Brazil is done with the unique system, and the remaining ones is private. And how you identify that? Today we are going to see two great talkings with the possibility how you can see atrial fibrillation in different ways, but of course you always start with the ACG screening, and then you do followed by imaging, echocardiodoppler. But here are the electrical mappings where you can map the electrical activity as well. You can map the intracardiac mapping, where you introduce catheters inside of the chambers and collect the electrical activity on the endocardial, touching or not touching. We can see from non-invasive point of view that Professor Olivier is going to talk a little bit. And also through these blood surface potential signals, we can use the 3D structure and calculate the reconstruct electrograms on the epicardial and endocardial before intervention. And here are how the introductions can be. You have different companies of electrical anatomic system, and you have different catheters. The industry of the catheter is huge. Here is our PSPM on the INCOR, where I developed with the bioengineering. And then if you need a 3D of the heart in the atrial chamber, patient can undergo to CT or MRI, and then you do the segmentation. And then with those 3D, with the blood surface, you calculate the inverse problem, estimate the reconstruct electrograms. Of course, together with this technology, you apply several pipelines of signal and image processing to be able helping clinicians to further understand the mechanisms and trying to help localizing where possible targets for ablation, improve treatment and quality of life. There's a lot of rooms to improvement here. This is where I have been dedicated across the years. You have errors in these commercial systems because the complexity of atrial fibrillation sometimes is not taken into account from the commercial systems. Not that they don't want, it's because it's a really is a very difficult problem to solve out. And then a way to help that is you using gold standard mapping in electrophysiology. You cannot do in patient, but you can do in animal model, explanted hearts, where you have optical mapping with a higher spatial resolution, where you have a sum of actual potentials in very small areas, and then you can compare the outcomes obtained from that with the electrical mapping and try to improve the electrical mapping. This is an image from our laboratory where we are doing optical mapping simultaneously with the electrical mapping. Yeah? These are the catheters developed by us, and we have we simulate clinic inducing the arrhythmia, and simultaneously we have panoramic optical mapping. And we also introduce this heart inside of a thoracic tank model to simulate our thorax, and then measure non-invasive characterization, and also helping reconstruct inverse solution to reconstruct electrograms. We work with those technologies together with patient data in silico models. Yeah? And what is the current therapies for atrial fibrillation in patients? You have the rhythmic control strategy. You can have some medications, anti-arrhythmic medications. You can rate control. Yeah? You can ablate areas, yeah? Invasive procedure. And inside of this invasive procedure, you can do pulmonary vein isolations, where sleeve muscles on the connections between the pulmonary vein and the atrial has similar behavior from SA node, out self-despolarizing, and then it triggers atrial fibrillation. And who has this for short periods? The most common mechanism is this one. It's not complex treatment and with a high success rate. Yeah? And here are pharmacological treatments: anticoagulants, beta blockers, calcium channels, anti-arrhythmic medications. I'm not a specialist on that. I'm not going to, to go deep. And then non-pharmacological treatments. I think the time is okay. Okay. Non-pharmacological treatments, you have the cardioversion process. Just remember that cardioversion can be electrical, chemical, and mechanical. Okay? Ablation technique is, as we mentioned before, we introduce a catheter, you try to localize the areas, you have help of 3D mapping system to localize map. You can having pacemaker implantation. Yeah? And of course, you change your lifestyle. Yeah? And then this arrhythmia, you can have efficient treatment, but this arrhythmia can return more than once. You need to sometimes require 2-3 interventions, and then it's make your quality of life reduced with serious implications, and improving treatment is the aims of many research and clinical groups across the world for more than a century. And this is just a diagram, block shot diagram to know a little deeper how is the procedure. You do ablation, and then if you could identify the areas and stop the arrhythmia, you return to sinus rhythm. You leave the cath lab catheter, okay, and hopefully you don't get this anymore, but there's a chance to return to ablation in your life. If you have refractory AF, you use drugs to the heart rate control. If you don't make efficient heart rate, you do the AV node ablation, and then you implantate PM is the pacemaker. Sorry. And if the drugs works effectively, you have a good heart control, you go home. But there are some people that drugs does not is effectively, and the procedure is moving on to the another therapeutic procedures. Yeah, and how we can improve AF management. Né? We can upstream therapies overview. We can target better mechanisms, especially for people that has this disease for long periods. We need improvements in pharmacological agents because some people are drug refractory. Early intervention, as early you might identify this a commitment you have a better chance to, together with the clinical team, to have a therapeutic choice, role of lifestyles, to think about more about your lifestyle, your eating, your drinking alcohol, physical activity, stress management. I know that everybody is very good on that in nowadays pressure, and a comprehensive treatment approach. And okay, and what is, I would not say future direction, but I would say sometimes this current directions. Wearable technology has been used for quite a few years ago. Here in the core, there's projects related to that. When you look outside of Brazil, there is several companies investing in that. You might know the most popular ones. Of course, genetic research insights, innovative ablation techniques, but it's not just the technology that explode the cells. In the end, when you burn in different ways, you are exploding them, but also in the diagnostic of the mechanisms. And of course, enhance patients be more aware of the disease. This is an important role to spread conscientization of dysarrhythmia across the overall population. And okay, and now let's enhance our understanding in terms of fibrillation. Try as an engineer in science competition and allied professionals, improve outcomes through education and proactivity measures. Thank you very much, Professor Mark Gutierrez.
Oh, thank you, Professor João Salinet. Before I invite Professor Olivier Meste, at CinC, we are developing new systems to monitoring AFib using wearable device, so you can monitor the patient continuously during 30 days to detect events. And also, we are responsible to the procedure to correct the AFib as the ablation. So we are working very hard in this topic. So I would like to invite Professor Olivier Meste from the University of Cote d'Azur. Professor Olivier, please. Okay.
You can see the pointer? Okay, you can see the pointer, but it's very small. Okay, it will work. So first of all, thank you for being here. I would like to thank Professor João Salinet and his wonderful team for this very warm welcome, because we are here firstly for a kind of pre-visit for competing cardiology coming in next September. So I strongly encourage you to participate. And so since it's a long trip, in fact, it's even longer for me because I passed by Salt Lake City before. It's a loop, a kind of loop. And we were a bit concerned by this long distance because we are all concerned by climate change. And so we were wondering if it was possible to make it even more useful and to participate to something more during our visit. And we suggested to Professor Salinet just to maybe give a seminar to make it more beneficial to everybody and to add meaning in our trip. And in fact, when we accepted to host, because I'm a president of the board, and we decided to accept or not the application of Brazil and especially São Paulo to organize this event. We hesitated because it's a very long trip, unknown country, not uncharted land, because everybody knows Brazil for sure. But it was the first time in Latin America. This is a very important point. And so we have been a bit hesitating about a predicted number of attendees and so on. And I have checked lately this evening, and currently we have 465 applications. And that's a very, very big number. And out of this 465, we have about 81 or 82 submissions from Brazilian teams. Wow, it's much more than expected. And together with Latin America, it's about 86, 87 submissions. So till now, it's a success. So next step is the number of registrations. By the way, we are a non-profit association, and so it means that we have to promote science. So it means that it's already a success because we have a good number, a high number of submissions, and the number of registrations is something else that is more concerned by financial aspects, but that's another story. Okay, so it was a kind of introduction. So congratulations to the local committee because you did a very good job that explained the how famous now is and will be the Congress in the coming months. Okay, congratulations. So what I'm going to show you and to share with you is some knowledge or research result on the topic of exploitation of body surface potential mapping, called BSPM, data for analyzing cardiac electrical activity during atrial fibrillation. And in fact, I will not go too far in the explanation of what is AF because it has been very perfectly done by Professor Salinet. So I will skip more toward more technical, maybe too much technical aspect of such analysis of BSPM data. So as previously mentioned, the prevalence of cardiovascular disease, CVD, has been predicted to increase in the coming years. That's well known. And what has not been mentioned, in fact, is that when you ablate atrial fibrillation, very often it recurs as AFL. I mean, whatever the therapy, you will almost already have a relapse of the AF. So a recurrence of the AF. That's a very important point. That could be AF itself or atrial flutter. That is a more macro-round-tree arrhythmia, and I did a lot in this field. It's maybe it's easier to characterize, but it's still an arrhythmia that should be treated and stopped as for the atrial fibrillation. So the catheter ablation for atrial fibrillation treatment has a recurrence with a blanking period of 1 year, about 50%. So you see that it's not so magic when you ablate, because after 1 year, you have a relapse of 50%. That is very much, in fact. And this medical procedure involves very lengthy because of the spatial location is uncertainty. So you have to do a first electromapping. And so you have to search, you burn in many places to stop during the ablation, to stop or to try to stop the fibrillation itself and to restore a sinus rhythm. And instead, you have more light or lighter therapy, that is electrical cardioversion. for the AFib treatment with a recurrence which is larger, in fact, 70% of recurrence after 1 year for the blanking period, and 40% after 6 weeks. So you see that it's not neither magic therapy. And the example I will give is mostly on the topic of electrical cardioversion. For a persistent patient, which is much more difficult to stop compared to paroxysmal subject. So there is a need to understand the source of arrhythmia and to predict the success of any treatment. Because if you can predict the success according to this kind of therapy, could be ablation or cardioversion, maybe you could avoid this kind of therapy. So if you can predict the success after, let's say, 6 weeks regarding the relapse of the AF, if you can predict the success of the current therapy, that's a good point, because you can even maybe change the therapy itself or maybe avoid the therapy if you consider that you will not be able to stop it for a long period. So that's the topic, how to predict. So what is a BSPM system? It's, you move from the well-known 12-lead system, for instance, to a 64 lead system, or 1 and 84, or even 2 and 52, and even more. So in fact, what I use personally is a two kind of systems. The first is a 64 with Warsaw University based on shape analysis of the ECG waveforms, and also with Valencia University based on recurrence analysis and also doing ECGI. I did a bit of ECGI on this kind of BSPM, and also with Maastricht University based on the 184 BSPM system by using recurrence analysis. And you can see here the theoretical charts, but in the real life, you can have a very handcrafted system on the upper right. This is from Warsaw University, very long to attach the electrodes, and a more industrial shape that is from Medtronic Cardio Insight, but I didn't use myself this kind of equipment. So theoretically, if you consider a perfect conductor volume, so everything is simple, you should need only 3 lead systems. So only 3 lead systems should be needed because you consider that you have a single cardiac dipole that you can represent in the 3-dimensional space. And in fact, with a 12 lead system, may not suffice because you don't have a non-homogeneous volume conductor. And when you observe the dimensionality, it's clear that it's higher than 3. So you should not be able to use only 3, let's say, 3 orthogonal system, X, Y, Z, or Frank lead system, for instance. And AF, since it's much more complex by nature, it needs a more high resolution in terms of spatiality and temporality that is mostly used by ECGI. So you can justify the use of the BSPM for AFib by using a 1-minute recording. That's the length of the record I will use. You have here an example of using the BSPM with 184 electrodes, recording during AF. The ventricular and the auricular activity has been separated, and we compute a dimensionality measurement with SVD, could be done on PCA, for instance. And what we observe, this is for, I even can read it. Yeah, okay, that's better. With the ventricular activity only, this is the blue line. We see that the dimensionality that correspond to the values of the value of the singular values itself. We can see that values different than 0 are much more than only 3. And if you compare the different than 0 values for the AF signal, you can observe that it's even much more. So what does it mean? It means that if you want to represent the AF only AF signal, you should need a lot of electrodes, because three electrodes, even 12 and so on, are not enough. That justifies the use of BSPM. So as you can see, you can compare the ventricular and the auricular signals, and so the auricular signal is much more complex, that explains a higher dimensionality. So in this presentation, I will focus on the analysis of atrial fibrillation observed with different BSPM systems. We will use recurrence and similarities that will be introduced to get a spatio-temporal analysis. We will use a coarse-grained modeling. I mean, mostly a phenomenological modeling, not a mechanical modeling or electrical modeling of the heart. So it's very phenomenological. So we use only the BSPM data, and we do not try to project at the first time, do not try to project the potential on the epicardium, for instance. And we will use a bit of ECG as well. So as I mentioned, we will use a short-term atrial signal, 1 minute only, during persistent AF. And the question is how to exploit so many leads, BSPM leads, and are we able to provide more insight on the AFib? I mean, to improve the understanding and to enrich the understanding of what is behind the AFib, and to predict the success of electrical cardioversion, as I mentioned. And first of all, we assume that we are able to separate the ventricular to the auricular activity from the signals. We have here an example. In blue, we have the full single lead ECG, and by using PCA or ECA, that's the technique of source separation, you can remove the ventricular activity, so you get a residual, the red line, corresponding to the auricular activity. And we will use this kind of residual, that is mostly the auricular activity. And on the left, we can observe that for this kind of signal, you have a very irregular, in terms of periodicity of the R wave, we have a very irregular rate that is a signature of AF usually. So very simple example. So what is a multivariable AFib recurrence analysis? So this is a bit of mathematics. So we compute this kind of recurrence. That is mostly the computation of the cosines between two sequential vectors. For instance, we imagine in the three-dimensional space, just to simplify, we have XYZ system. We have for each time one vector. And if we compute the cosine between each sequential or consecutive vector, we will have a description of the behavior of this vector. Okay, this is what we call, and we take one vector and we compute the cosine with the subsequent vector. We take another vector and we do the same. So we're able to compute a matrix, what we will call a recurrence matrix. That's this kind of matrix on the left-hand side. So we have in this example a number of leads, and for each time we compute the cosine. So we have a matrix for one column for each time, and for one block of data, let's say, for a given duration. And thanks to this matrix, if we compute the average over each column of this matrix, we got the function R of P. And what we observe is that it's 1 for lag 0, because if you compute the cosine between the same vector with itself, the cosine is 1 because the angle is 0. Okay, so that explains why for the lag 0 we have 1. But what we firstly observe is that you have a kind of ringing, and so you have high values at the beginning, and it seems to be stabilized with time. So it seems that we have a short-term behavior and a long-term behavior that is very stable. Okay, this is the first observation. And if on the same patient we compute the same on different blocks, the same R of P function, we have two examples on the left, and we do that on all subjects. We have, when we have one RP, since it seems to be a ringing function with behind a pure sinusoid, that is not exactly the case. You can compute the envelope. That is a modulation in amplitude of this ringing signal. We call that the envelope. And if we compute the envelope for all patients, and we know the label of each patient, could be recurrent or non-recurrent after 6 weeks. This is a blanking period. When we normalize each envelope for each patient with a long-term recurrent value that is on the right part, you can see that, maybe I can use a pointer. You can see that here is very stable along the time. So it means that for almost all patients, we have exactly the same envelope. What does it mean? It means that in a 0.5 seconds, this is an average value. In the 0.5 period, you have what we call the short time behavior, similar shape for all patients, recurrent and non-recurrent. And after 0.5, we have in the long-term recurrence, we have something very stable. That is very interesting. And if we compare the envelope, the mean envelope of the recurrent and the non-recurrent, what we observe is a slight difference. Where is the pointer? Here. Is that the envelope of the recurrent is slightly smaller than the envelope of the non-recurrent. What does it mean? It means that for the non-recurrent, you have a higher values of the ringing at the beginning of the curve. And for the recurrent AF, you have a lower ringing values. Okay? So it seems to be like a stability in space of the vector that is more, which is higher for the non-recurrent compared to the recurrent subject. Okay? And also from this kind of function, we will extract the minimal value, first minimum value, first maximum value, and the timing of those values. That's very important. And it will help to characterize also the subject and to get more insight in the AF behavior. Okay? And second, what we observe, we are going to try to simulate that with a phenomenological model that I'm going to introduce. So this is a phenomenological model where for each, we are able to generate one simulated signal for each lead, where we can see that is purely a cosine with a fixed frequency, for instance, could be 6 Hertz for AF signal, plus a random stochastic, let's say a stochastic part. This stochastic part is in fact a Brownian motion that you can control in terms of range of the Brownian motion and the rate of the change of the Brownian motion. So you have two parameters to generate this kind of artificial signal. So that is the range of dispersion and the rate of the dispersion. So it means how fast the vector could change, that's the rate, and the range is what is the bounds of the change of the vector in a multi-dimensional space. Okay. And so we have some example here where the simplest, on the upper left side, we have a small variation range and a small variation rate. It seems to be very regular in three-dimensional space. We increase the variation rate, we have something globally stable, but if you look into detail, you have some variability because you have increased the variation rate. If we increase the variation rate, variation range, but with a small variation rate, we have in space, we occupy in space a larger space, while in one loop, it seems to be very stable. And if you increase both parameters, we have something that seems to be random. And we expect that it's close to what is observed during AF. It's a modeling from far. It's not modeling from the epicardium. So it's a very phenomenological model of, when observing the data from the surface of the torso. Okay? So we are able to generate artificial signal. For instance, we have on the upper chart the real one, for instance, the solid line, and for the dash line, we have the modeled one or generated one. For sure, it doesn't exactly fit because it's a random process. But in terms of features that we can extract from this kind of data, we got exactly the same feature from the generated data and the observed one. Okay, so we have at the upper level a complex case. In the middle, we have a simpler case, and we can even have the same dominant frequency as well because it's controllable. And also, this kind of simulation helps to lead us to normalize the parameters extracted from the RP signal. I will give you an example. So we tried first to correlate the values of the first minimum. This is P1. Yes. We correlate for all subjects. For the 32 patients recurrent and the 31 patients without recurrence of AF. So it's 63 patients overall. And so we correlated the value of P1, P1 here, and the time of P1, okay? And we have this kind of correlation. And the same for P2. And we observe that the longer is TP1, the smaller is the value of P1. So what does it mean? It means that that's a very interesting result. That is, the fastest the circuit loops, the lowest is the spatial dispersion. So it means that if the loop is very fast, you do not let the electrical pathway to wander, so you have a less dispersed vector if it turns fast. And if you let more time to the electrical pathway to wander, in fact, meaning that the cycle is longer or TP is longer, you have more variability. And if you have more variability, the value of the recurrence will be lower. Okay? So it's an interesting result. And the second is that we try to distinguish or to classify the recurrent and non-recurrent subjects thanks to these features or parameters. And we have been able to get good significant level, and even by using a logistic regression, by using all the parameters, we reach an accuracy of 0.71. That's a good number for persistent AF subject to distinguish or to predict if the AFib will be recurrent or not. So it's a pretty good number, only by using surface data. And in fact, what we done is to compute the recurrence for the vector. And one vector is the expression of the multi-lead system. And using this kind of approach, we can separate the component extracted from each electrode, not all together with one single vector, but we can separate the content of each electrode with this kind of analysis, and I will summarize that. So we have here 2 examples. On the upper part, we have a complex AF, and the lower part is a simple or more stable AF. And we computed, in fact, the value of the first mean of the RP that correspond to this value there. We computed the value of this minimum for this subject, and we projected the value of each electrode over the torso. We have here the front part of the torso, where stands the electrode corresponding to the frontal plane, and we have here the back of the torso. And what we observe is that for the very complex AFib, the value of the minimum is small because the color is blue, okay? And if we compute the values of the minimum for this more stable AFib, what we observe is that the values are really higher because it's yellow or almost burnt yellow or red. And we have the red circle is V1, just to give the location of Z1. And the black circle is the max of the map, okay? So first we observe that, comparing very simple example, that depending on the complexity of the AF, the map is completely different in terms of value, of not that much in terms of location of the maximum, but in terms of value itself. And if we compute a Wilcoxon rank sum test to perform, to compute the difference between the median, including all the subjects, what we observe is that for the non-recurrent, we have here the non-recurrent map, the median of the non-recurrent map of the patients, and we have the value, the median value of the recurrent patients, and we observe that we have significantly different electrode values in the front plane, but not so close to V1, but on the upper electrode. So it means that it seems that at the level of the electrode close to V1 doesn't really allow us to distinguish or to predict the recurrent to the non-recurrent subject. You should use the highest electrode in terms of space that correspond to this electrode. You should use this electrode to distinguish or to predict in a better way. And what else about this dots? In fact, we didn't compute any kind of Bonferroni correction for multiple comparison. So maybe, just to be very strict on that, so maybe these significant differences are by random, okay? So this is, and if you compute the energy itself, only the energy for the electrode, we observe that the energy for the non-recurrent here is not very much different than the energy of the recurrent, first. The higher part of the energy is located close to V1. It's expected because it's well known that V1 express, or you can observe better, is the AF close to the V1, but we do not distinguish significantly the two populations with the energy because we don't have any statistically different differences. Okay, maybe, I think I'm running out of time, or no, I don't. 15, oh, 15, not 50. Okay, perfect. So this is another exploitation of recurrence, of the recurrence matrix, but used in different manner. What we're going to do now is we take one time, and so we have one vector for that time in the multidimensional space, and we compute the cosine with the next vector. Okay? So this is what we call one lag similarity. So it will give us one value. We take the second vector and we compute the cosine with the next vector. So we will have another value, and so on. And so we have this kind of trace. Okay? So it's a one lag similarity. And what we observe is that it's not at all constant. It's not always close to 1. We have something periodical. So close to 1, drop. Close to 1, drop, and so on. And it seems to be periodical. And what is the meaning of these values? It means that when it's close to 1, it means that the vector is moving slowly, but with a constant speed. And when you have a drop, it means that you have a sudden acceleration. Okay? So it means that the content, the behavior of each vector is slow down, accelerate, slow down, accelerate. And as we will see, in fact, in one cycle of AF, you have 2 deceleration and 2 acceleration. What does it mean? It means that you have deceleration, acceleration, deceleration, acceleration. So it's not at all something that is a constant in terms of speed of the depolarization, but you have mostly 2 phases in almost all patients. Not in all, but the big majority exhibit such behavior. So it's very interesting to check that you have this behavior of 2 acceleration and 2 deceleration in one cycle. So it's not at all something that is very homogeneous or uniform in terms of speed, but it's even much more complex than that. Okay, and what we did here is taking the same example I used previously. I have chosen only the highest, the timing of the highest value there, corresponding to the where the speed is slowing down. And I computed a principal component analysis, and I plotted the 2 principal component values. And for a complex AFib, we observed nothing special. The fact that it seems to be rounded is due to the PCA analysis, so it's normal. So it seems to be randomly spread or distributed over the space for the complex one. And for the more stable or simplest one, we observe 2 clusters there in a phase opposition. So it means that in space, the location of the 2 deceleration are in opposite direction. Okay? And it's clear when plotting the 2 principal component values for based on the vectors of the maximum of the one lag similarity. Okay. So, and we can even show, I will focus mostly on this chart there, and we can show that the amount of slow phases is also related to what I call the long-term recurrence, that is the bounded values that we got from the RP vector, from the recurrence analysis. So it means that everything seems to be linked and expressed in different way, and we believe that it provides different insights or complementary insight of what is happening, even if it's very phenomenological understanding, because we are at the surface of the torso, we are not inside the heart. So we have to take care that it's very observed from far. Okay? It's a coarse grain, let's say, modeling. And to finish, I will show some of the latest results that has been published this year, where we try to compare features extracted from our recurrence analysis and compare with data extracted from the ECGI. and during reentrant atrial activity AF patient. What does it mean? That it means that we have the BSPM on the left side. We have the BSPM. We have some simple traces of the BSPM leads. We compute the ECGI because we are able to get a CT scan and so on, and to do the inverse problem or to resolve the inverse problem. So we have the electrical potential at the level of the epicardium, and we picked some points on the on this synthetic, because it's not really observed, on this synthetic electrical surface, let's say, and we plotted the corresponding electrical potential, okay? And we computed on these two sets of data, on these two data sets, the recurrence analysis and a large variety of different features that I will not show. And that's the first way to approach this kind of research or work. And also, thanks to the ECGI, we computed rotor analysis, such as how many rotors do we observe at the surface of the heart, what is duration of each rotor, and so on, and try to correlate that to the recurrence analysis based on the surface electrode. So in that case, we have 28 AF patients. This is permanent, if I remember correctly, permanent patients. To compute the ECGI, we use the BSPM plus the patient torso and electrode position using some photogrammetry performed by Valencia team. And the atrial geometry have been derived from MRI segmented atrial database. The ventricular activity has been removed by using PCA, and the inverse problem has been computed with a zero-order Tikhonov method and so on. This is a well-known method to compute the inverse problem. So the signal complexity and recurrence metrics has been computed both on the BSPM and the ECGI signal. And we also computed number of rotors per second and rotor duration only by using ECGI. Okay, so we not provide all results, but in my opinion, the most important, that is, I remind what kind of feature we use from the BSPM and using a recurrence analysis, that is the value of the first minimum, values of the first maximum, and the timing corresponding to those values. And we computed the same on the ECGI signals. And we see a very strong correlation. So what does it mean? It means that by computing ECGI, you do not lose fundamental information because we correlate very, very, very much. However, till now, in my presentation, we cannot say that ECGI provided something else, something better. It just is comparable to what could be done at the level of the surface torso, of the torso. And when you try to correlate information based on rotors analysis and the BSPM features, that's something slightly different. So from the ECGI, the rotors has been assessed with Hilbert transform to compute the phase, in fact. And from the phase, we computed the singularity points, rotors per second, and mean rotor duration. And we correlated these values with values expressed or extracted from that recurrence function. And what we observe is a moderate correlation with rotor features. We see, for instance, the highest is probably yes, that value, where the mean rotor on the bottom left, almost everything is moderately correlated, even highly correlated. And on this example, we can see that there is a strong correlation between the mean rotor duration computed over by using the ECGI, and the minimum value extracted from the BSPM and using the recurrence analysis. So what does it mean? It means that if the value of P1 is very low, so it seems to mean that there is a high complexity in the AF, the mean duration is very low. So it means that if the duration is long, the value of P1 will be larger. That is meaningful and straightforward. I mean that you could expect that if your rotor is long in terms of duration, mainly several cycles, for instance, you should observe something very regular and very stable as well. And if you compute also the mean rotor duration with a long time recurrence, that is bounded values, we observe as well a very high correlation, meaning that if the mean rotor duration is long, the LTR will be long as well. Okay, so it helps us even we don't have the ground truth. The best in that case would have been to have the ground truth by using an electromapping system to compare exactly what we observe from the surface to what is inside the heart. But it's not the case. At least by using ECGI, we have a good explanation of what we observe by using a recurrence plot or recurrence analysis using the BSPM system. So that's the end of my presentation. So is there some time for questions? I don't know. Okay, very good. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Olivier, for this nice presentation. I would like to invite Professor Jean-Phillippe.
Thank you so much. Put that into this term. Good. Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I want, before starting this presentation, I want just to thank the organizing committee, Professor Salinet, and all the team. I think they are all here. And I want to thank you for this welcoming in your country and for the work you are doing. It's really amazing. And I must admit, this short trip changed my life. I came in this country as a vegetarian, and after a couple of dinner and doing visuja, how do you say, Rodrigo? What we ate yesterday? Vijuada. I love it. So I'm leaving this country as a hardcore meat eater, and that's just a fantastic experience. So thank you so much for everyone. I mean, I have no doubt that this conference is going to be a success. Olivier talked about the number of abstract submissions. This is amazing. This is really incredible. And really, you're opening a new path for the Computing in Cardiology organization to Latin America and to South America. And we hope that this is the first one, but that's not the last one. There'll be many, many more. So I'm going to talk about, I want to tell you a story. I'm going to talk about a little bit of my research during the past 10 years. And I'm going to focus on really cardiac monitoring in the context of atrial fibrillation. It seems that this is the common theme that's going to be discussed, that is discussed and will be discussed a little bit later today. So my name is Jean-Phillippe Couderc. I'm actually professor of medicine and professor of electrical and computer engineering at University of Rochester. But what I've done while I moved from France, as you noticed, I don't have the regular New York accent. I actually moved in the US in 1997 for a postdoc, and I did all my academic career in the United States. But what I've done is that at University of Rochester, I also did an MBA, so I have also some activity as an entrepreneur, and it's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today, how I went from doing research in an American university to creating companies, creating products, because I believe when you are an engineer, and specifically in biomedical engineering things, it's great to invent new technology, but it's so important that your technology doesn't stay in the drawer. Your technology needs to reach the patients and have meaningful impact. And to do that, you have a step which is commercialization, which is, sometimes difficult, depends on your culture, your country, how universities actually manage with these kind of things. But it's a whole circle, right? You come from simple ideas, you develop a prototype, you develop a product, you make your company, you sell your product, and you impact the life of patients, and hopefully you have make significant and meaningful changes. So what I'm going to talk about is cardiac monitoring. And after the COVID-19, if there was something good about COVID-19, it's really that people started appreciating how telemedicine could be useful. And there are many applications that exist, and I must say that cardiology is probably not the field that benefits the most from telemedicine, because you want to be close to the patient. More, I would say, applicable to mental health and these kind of things. But when you look at the statistics, especially in the US, and I apologize because a lot of things I'm going to present are related to United States, not so much to Brazil, but I hope that it is somehow applicable. So, telecardiology is still, in the US, the 6th growing telemedicine specialty. Okay? So it really means that the physician in the US, and I guess also in countries where you have a lot of rural patients, where access to healthcare services is difficult, telemedicine has really an important role to play, okay? And even in US, where, Americans are happy to say that they have a great healthcare system, you see that telemedicine is very important, and that they use this tool to reach the patients that are obviously far from healthcare resources. So I'm going to talk about AFib. I don't want to spend too much time. Professor Salinet, Professor Meste did a pretty good job at presenting what it is. Summary, it's a pandemic, no question about it. In the US, 2.7 million people have it. It's expected to reach 16 million people by 2050. People are living longer, but people are living sicker. That's really what's happening. And AF is going to be one of the challenges, I believe, of modern medicine and modern cardiology. I did a little bit of research in the plane to look what's happening in Brazil. What I found really is that it's very similar than US in Brazil. I mean, AF is super prevalent. What I read about, and this I don't have explanation, and maybe we can talk about that later, but it seems that in Brazil there is much less use of anticoagulation therapy for some reason, which is obviously a very important of patient management and avoiding strokes and I would say the progression of the diseases. So in a sense, is it because there's not enough monitoring of patients? It is because of the healthcare system, the way it is used. I don't have this information, but it's interesting to see that it's what's happening. So what are the cardiac monitoring solutions that are available to everyone, at least in the United States? I don't know, again, in Brazil, I guess you have, I'm pretty sure, the classical Holter 24 hour to 72 hours measurement or monitoring. This is good. This is very cumbersome, right? Who wants to sleep with all these cables around your body? It's very limited in time. That's okay, but that's not obviously the best technology. The ECG patch that you see in second position here is becoming extremely popular, specifically in the US and in Europe. A lot of ECG device companies are going there and now have their products. This is great because it's small, you put it on your torso, and you have 14 days continuous monitoring, single lead in general, but you know, for rhythm annotation, rhythm management, pretty good. It basically do the job. So really, this is a good solution. But again, this is limited to 14 days, right? And as Professor Meste and others said, we have no cure for AF. We have therapy, we have drugs, we have ablation, we have cardioversion, but nobody is cured about AF. So there's a need for really monitoring the patient for all their life. And if you look at the statistics, the people that have AF, not only have AF, but a lot of them have prognostic problems because it's very difficult to live with a disease that is not there, meaning that around 20% of the patients who have AF are asymptomatic, right? They don't feel anything, and yet they have the same risk for stroke and the development of heart failure. So there's really a need for a technology that helps detect, specifically in paroxysmal patients, when the AF is coming back, okay? But you need a technology that is efficient, that is invisible, that actually helps these patients and do not put too much constraint on their life. And I will talk a little bit about that. Apple Watch. So Apple Watch, obviously, if you see Apple investing in something, it means there's a lot of money there, right? So really they came up with this Apple Watch. It's super tasty in a sense. Not every patient can, one, afford this kind of technology, and two, use this kind of technology. So yes, it's great, but no, it's not perfect for really patients. And then there is these things, I don't know if it's sold in Brazil and if you have heard about it. It's called a LifeCore. This is a little device. You put your finger on it. It does record a 1-lead ECG and give you the diagnostic. Oh, thank you. And give you the diagnostic about the presence of AF. And really, this is a great device, but there's one limitation, which is super important, is that, and I've seen that in patients in the US and in our clinical trials, is that when you give this device to patients, they're super excited. They're like, wow, I can do an ECG any place in my house, anytime. They do record 100 of ECGs during the first week. Then they record 20 during the second week. And then after 3 weeks, they don't use it anymore. There's no excitement. It's not fun, right? So what does it mean? It means that these patients, if they are asymptomatic, right, so they have no concern about their health status, they will not use the technology, okay? So it means that it's really a great device if you are symptomatic, okay, and you feel the palpitation, you feel tired, you do an ECG and you check. But if you are asymptomatic, you basically never use it, you never put it outside of your pocket. So we need to solve all this problem. We need to come up with a solution that actually is going to help doing this monitoring in a better way, okay? So we want to do optimal management of the AFib patient, okay? Long term, we want something that never stops, okay? Not in terms of continuous, but in terms of in your life. Once you have this technology, use it for the rest of your life, okay? And really what you want a solution that is appealing to the patients, okay? Patients that have now chronic diseases, okay? Meaning that they have to take their medication every day, they have a lot of constraints. You don't want to ask them to add a device to their life, to add something to do to their life. You want to give them a technology that is invisible and that basically will help them knowing when something is wrong, okay? So basically, I'm repeating myself, but we need a solution, new solution, enabling long-term cardiac monitoring that is low compliance, reliability, high compliance, I don't know why I have low here, high compliance, reliability, and which is easy to deploy also, right? If you have a device and you need to send it to your patients and they need to send it back, I mean, it's a nightmare from a logistics point of view. So you need to really address all these type of problem. So what we developed is called facial video based monitoring of cardiac pulsatil signal, okay? We invented this term, video plethysmography. Actually, I would say the core technology came from MIT that was actually developed just to extract heart rate with a camera, looking at a face or hands of the patients, and extracting a PPG photoplethysmographic-like signal from which you can basically measure the heart rate. What we did at University of Rochester when we look at this technology, we were the first one to say, wow, if you can measure the heart rate, maybe you can measure the variability of the pulse, and maybe you can diagnose the presence of abnormal variability of the pulse. I'm not saying AF yet, right? And I don't think I'll say it. But abnormality of the pulse that is associated with cardiac arrhythmias. Okay, so that was the whole idea, but that's not stopping there. So there's another term that you see now in all IEEE publication. People didn't want to use our term of video plethysmography, which is very unclear to me. But they talk about remote photoplethysmography or PPG. That's basically what people talk about. So we did the first publication. It was in 2015, where really we did our initial actually investigation on how performant we can be with video camera to do this kind of monitoring. The concept is super simple. I'm not going too much in technology. What happens when your heart beats, there is change in blood pressure underneath your skin? Because the skin of the face is very thin, you have basically a modulation of the light that refract and reflect from the face that is modulated by the blood pressure. The light is absorbed by hemoglobin, so the more hemoglobin you have in your vascular system, the more basically light is refracted, absorbed, and less is refracted from the skin. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about blushing, right? When you are excited, basically you increase the volume, you become red. We can see that. But this phenomenon exists on a bit-to-bit level. Fortunately, we don't see it because everybody would just, have these changes of color. But it is subtle. It is there, and the technology can actually extract that with video cameras. Why? Because we love selfies, because we love to have actually good pictures of us. Now you have camera everywhere. You have one here, you have one there, and you have a third one here. Think about the number of cameras you have in your pocket. In average, you have more than 2 or 3 cameras in your pocket. So cameras are sensors that are going to be everywhere, okay? Very soon you won't enter a room without a camera looking at what's happening, okay? And those sensors are super good quality because we want to look good and we want to have nice selfies, specifically in phones. So the technology has been developed, and there are many ways of doing that, okay? And I think I like this presentation, which is very early. It was published in 2022, where and shows you basically what's happening in general. You detect a face, you extract RGB values, you do some averaging of pixel values, you come up with extraction of a signal, you do some motion suppression. I'll show you why it's so important. And there's different way of extracting the pulse. Can be done by ICA, can be done by spectral analysis. Obviously now a lot of deep learning and machine learning are applied to do extraction of information on that. So that's a method that basically is very, very easy to access. So this is, I love this slide, I'm going to tell you, because this is our first experiment, and that's actually an experiment that led to more than 10 years of research. So you have here a patient's, we put a video camera above a patient that was going to be defibrillated. It's going to be defibrillated now. Here we go. This is the defibrillation. The AF is treated. The heart is resetting. It's coming back to sinus rhythm. So we did multiple measurements like this, where with a simple video camera that was a webcam that we put above the bed of the patients, and we did measure some signals. So the blue signal that you can see at the bottom is the first VPG signal. It's very noisy. But what you can see already in this is that there is a high frequency component and there is a low frequency component to it. The low frequency component is the respiration, right? When you breathe, the volume of your lungs are changing, it moves the head, it moves the whole body. So this low frequency is actually the respiratory components of the patients, and the high frequency is actually this fluctuation in the skin color, this blushing, bit-to-bit basis flushing phenomenon that is actually all included into this signal. So we did our first publication, it was in 2015, as I said, it was in the Heart Rhythm Journal, high-profile medical journal, where we just said, okay, we're going to do an ECG, we're going to do a VPG with camera in these people, before and after cardioversion, and we're going to try to see how good we are at discriminating between measurement during sinus rhythm and during AF. That's it. This is the ROC curve, you all know that. This is basically in the bold line, what we call PHS. So old, I can't remember what it means. I think it's prominent harmonic things. But we are not using that anymore. It's all method. But what is important in this figure and in this publication is that if you take the ECG, you don't do annotation, and you do the heart rate variability factors to discriminate between presence of AF or sinus rhythm, works pretty much the same, okay? You have actually a curve that use the video signal that is very centered on what you can do with HRV parameters. So again, that was old work, but very initial demonstration that you could do that. In general, when you have an idea, how do you know if it's a good idea? One of the things is that other people take it and try it, okay? Super, super important, right? You can have a great idea, you think it's the best idea. If nobody cares about it, it's not a good idea. So we were super happy that in 2022, so still 6 years after we really published our things, one of the group of Taiwan came up with a machine learning system that was using here industrial camera. It's a $1,000 camera, very high quality camera, to do actually what we said we could do, or one could do, is the detection of AF, so AF versus non-AF, using video camera in a very large number of recording, much more than what we did. It's why they were able to publish in Nature, by the way. But they confirm what we published, that really using a video camera without touching a patient. Again, it's not the sensor that touches the skin, right? We are talking about a sensor that is as few meters from the patient. Imagine that, okay? It's almost magical. You are seeing a patient, you don't touch it, you don't talk to him, and you know that something is wrong in his cardiac rhythm. This is magical. To me, I love science for this kind of thing. So anyway, I think it was a good idea. So we had to really go the next step. As I said, when you develop this technology, we wanted really this to go forward to reach patients and really make sure that this would help people. So we created a study and we started a company. The company is called VPG Medical. I raised around $3.2 million from the East Coast investors in Boston in a period of 6 months. And then we started the company. And really the first things that we did was to really do a clinical study to demonstrate really what we wanted to do, to demonstrate to who? To demonstrate to the FDA. Huh? Because unfortunately, or fortunately, depends where you are in your political status, I would say, but the FDA is really the barrier to technology to enter the market in the US. If you don't have FDA clearance, you cannot sell anything and you cannot push your technology to the patients. And we knew already, and I'll tell you more about the story if you're interested after my presentation, but we knew that that was going to be a big challenge for many reasons. The first one is that FDA never saw that before. So you go to the agency in Washington, DC, you say, oh, I have this new technology that can save life of people. Look at that. And they never seen that. They have no reference. There's no reference. There's no predicate device. They have no idea how it works. So you have to do all the work of demonstrating how it works. and put together the data necessary to convince actually an agency, a governmental agency, that such technology is working and it's worth basically putting on the market. And what the FDA looks at, efficiency and safety, and that is safe, okay? We're doing video, so we're taking image of people, etc. So there's a problem of privacy here, right? So the FDA come back, so I'll talk a little bit more about how we solve that. But really, the thing that happened is that we developed an app, okay, with the company. And this is the app. The app is today on Apple Store, Google Store, and all these things, but you cannot use it. You can download it, but it won't work. It is today actually not working because it's not FDA clear. What is this app about? And you see the main basically screen of the app. It gives you your heart rate. If you don't have AF, the system measures your heart rate. What is super nice about this app that I think is very unique is that we enable with this app what we call passive monitoring. What does it mean? It means that you have two ways of testing yourself with this app. One, you can do a selfie. It's like every selfie you like to do. And while you're doing the selfie, I'll show you a video. We measure the heart rate and we tell you if you have actually AF. First method. Second method, we call it passive monitoring. What does it mean? It means that this app has a service that runs in the background of your phone, and each time you open your phone and you do whatever you like with your phone, it could be watching Netflix, it could be doing your email, browsing, we grab the camera and we detect your face and we measure your heart rate. So this is really the innovation, because you have a system that is on a smartphone. Everybody has a smartphone today. You can be in the poorest area of the world. People have smartphone and this technology. And it really means that it is invisible to the user. They don't have to think about it. They love to watch Netflix. They love to go to internet. They love to do that. But they are monitored while they are doing something else. We call it passive VPG monitoring. And this is, again, really the innovation, because you enable, I would say, discrete cardiac monitoring. It's not continuous. Each measurement is only for 30 seconds. But you know how much you spend on your phone, looking at your phone? I don't know. I think in Brazil it's pretty much like in US. In average, people spend 4 hours a day looking at their phone. 4 hours. For us, it's the great opportunity. This is 4 hours of cardiac monitoring, okay? So this is really the app, and there's more to the app. There's not only AF and heart rate measurement, but as you see, we have also given the possibility to the patients to enter their symptoms. If they feel palpitation, if they feel bad, they have the possibility of clicking, and they have a whole record of what happened every day, not only actively entering the information, but also passively gathering this data. This is an example of what happened during what happened during a selfie. Let me put that on. So this is a very charming old woman that basically takes her selfie, and you'll see we enhance actually the blushing of her skin. And this is basically the pulse that is extracted from basically what she records. We extract the heart rate, we extract the respiratory rate, and we do a diagnostic on the cardiac rhythm. Again, we never claim that people have AF. What we claim is that they have basically variability of pulse, right? AF is an electrical disease. What we look is at the hemodynamic reflection of electrical instability. It's two different worlds, two different types of information. The FDA didn't allow that we said you detect AF. You detect abnormal rhythm. Then you do an ECG and you say that you have AF. Very important. Now, Apple and other companies are trying to change that and be able to really claim that you have an AF diagnosis based on PPG. And I think the FDA is going there, but it's not really there yet. So how does it work? There are many, there's so many things, right, you need to think about. First, you need to think about that what you're measuring is a human. And because it's passive, you know, sometimes you put your phone on the table and there's nothing happening. You're not looking at it. So the algorithm needs to detect first a face, right? So you have a first step, which is face detection. Then once you detected a face, you want to make sure that the person you're measuring is actually the right person, and it's not the neighbors or the grandchild that is playing with the phone, right? So the second step is face recognition, right? So you detect a face, you detect that we don't detect who is it, but we detect that this is the person that is supposed to be measured, right? So there's a face recognition. And very importantly, I didn't highlight that too much so far, but because we are looking at refraction and reflection of light from the skin, each time people move, because the source of light is constant and stable, movement are associated with modulation of light that comes from the skin. So we need to really control or at least assess what is the stability of the person when you do the measurement, okay? And that's the most technically challenging piece of this is really how do you ensure that your measurement is actually of good quality and is correct. Example of tracing, I'll show a little bit more than that, but really that's one we publish again in this paper in 2015. You are mostly engineers, so that's pretty clear to you. You have the VPG on the upper panels, and below you have the spectral, and you see basically during AF, the variability, at least in this figure, is expressed by the multiple peak frequencies, which is single when you have sinus rhythm. It's for basically just characterizing how things look like. This is an example for a recording done during a clinical study from a 64-year-old black male with an history of paroxysmal AF. You have at the top the ECG, you see some arrhythmias there. And you have the PPG. So in this study, not only we did an ECG recording, we did a PPG ear lobe sensor recording, and we did the video because, again, we measure hemodynamic impact of electrical activity. We needed a reference that was a PPG. So all our studies have all those measurements done. And as you see, there's very nice correlation between the, let's say, contact sensor for PPG and the VPG, which is contactless extraction of the pulse. There are differences, okay? And what is very interesting to see, it's what happened during AF. And in this slide, you can see an example, different patients. It's a 61-year male, white, history of paroxysmal AF. You see a beautiful AF rhythm at the top that was recording with a patch. And what you see in the middle is the PPG, and you see synchronization with the QRS and the peak on the PPG. You see a little bit more difference between PPG and VPG here. Huh? Because VPG are contactless, we are more affected by external factors in terms of noise to the signal. But what I want to point out here is that you see all this electrical activity, the instability, and the short, look at the example of the short coupling intervals here. You have actually those QRS that are super close to each other. And what you see in the PPG side, not only VPG, is that when you have these very short coupling intervals, you have actually very small signal in the PPG and VPG. Makes sense, right? The person is in AF, the ventricle is not filled correctly because the atria do not work well. You have a ventricular contraction with a ventricle that is not full, so the hemodynamic features of this becomes very, very small. And sometimes it does not happen. It's called actually, okay, I'll find it later. There's a specific medical term, it's not coming. Yes. So what happened, I'll come back later to this, but what really is happening is that in pulse deficit, came back. So it's called pulse deficit, right? It's when you have an electrical contraction that is not associated with hemodynamic pattern, right? Happens all the time. It happens even if you have VPCs and a normal heart, it can happen. It's rare, but it's very important because when you have pulse deficit, you have a decorrelation between, you have no similarity between your signal, hemodynamic signal, and electrical signal. The things are not the same. They don't represent the same thing anymore, right? So it's very important not to forget about that. And you see a lot of publication today where people present PPG, hemodynamic signal during AF. They never talk about pulse deficit, and it's so, so important not to neglect that. So just to show you a little bit what we studied in these clinical studies, there are many factors, what we call the technical factors, the user factors, and the environmental factors. Technical factors are what sensor do you use? Unfortunately, there's hundreds of type of smartphone and hundreds of type of video cameras with different sensitivity and different capabilities. How do you develop an app that is compatible with all this? Super complex, super expensive, very difficult to put in place. Distance and angle, movement. I talk about movement, distance and angle. Nobody looks at the phone the same way, so the angle with the face may change, so you have to measure that. You have to make sure you know what to do. There are user factors, very important, complexion, you know, skin color. If you have a lot of melanin, basically you have a protection against absorption of light, so the signal is different. I'll talk a little bit about how this have affected us. Then movement, and obviously recording duration. When you are in passive monitoring, the monitoring continues until those factors that ensure good quality of measurement are not met. So we measure all these factors all the time. We do the measurement. If one factor is not good, let's imagine the light is off, somebody put the light off, we detect that, we stop the recording. So it's not only monitoring the patient himself or herself, it's also monitoring all these environment factors and making sure that the environment factors remain optimal for good measurement. And obviously, in these environmental factors, you have the type of light source, illumination, and light stability. Type of light source, I mean, here those seems to be incandescent light, but now we have LED lights. You can be outside, can be the sun, which is the best light, obviously, to do that. So we always thought that our technology would work very well in Brazil because it's all sunny all the time. So this is basically the clinical study. This is our inclusion-exclusion criteria. I won't go too far into the description of those, but really in the study what we did is that we enroll patients that have a diagnosis of paroxysmal AF. They were not supposed to be AF when they came in the lab of the company, and we basically put them in front of camera and change all the factors around. We ask them to move, we change the illumination, we change all these factors that I've described below. And this is the list of factors that were affected. So type of smartphone, we had a Holter recorder, we had basically synchronization between ECG and video, right? They are very different devices. They work with different processors that are different quality processor in terms of speed. You have to adjust and make sure that those ECG and VPG are super well synchronized, because you're going to use the ECG as a reference to decide whether it is an AF rhythm or something else. So I don't want to go too much in details. That's a lot of things and probably too heavy for this presentation. But what I want to highlight is that we look at the power of our study, right? Obviously, it's less of a concern in general for engineers. It's a lot of concern for clinicians, right? When you do a study, you have to demonstrate that you have enough patients to show what you're showing from a statistical point of view. This is basically the statistical background for the study, where let's focus on the right panel, where you have the number of subjects needed and the number of repeated measures per subject to know which value you need to have 90% power to detect what you want to detect. Okay? If you do a clinical trial, you know what I'm talking about. And basically here it was nice. You can see that if you do around 10 measurements for 15 patients, you basically have enough data to demonstrate that you can detect what you want to detect with the power you need. So, as you all know, AF is not only AF, right? And cardiac rhythm can be very different. So when we did our measurement, we created 3 classes of rhythm. the AFib, which was full AFib, okay, but could have VPCs and PACs and other arrhythmias. The sinus, we define actually sinus rhythm, and again, those are 30 seconds measurements. So in this 30-second ECG, we wanted to have only sinus rhythm, so it's 100% sinus rhythm, no arrhythmias. And the third group, which is arrhythmias, where it's not really a AFib, but this is basically sinus rhythm combined with occurrence of non-sinus beats, VPC and PACs that have obviously or can have different hemodynamic signature. But it was important for us to do these three groups so we understand better how the technology behaves when you measure and you monitor these patients. This is basically the demographic of this population. We had long-standing, persistent, paroxysmal persistent, and permanent AF. If you don't know, there's a specific definition about those AF. But what you see on the right figure is really for all the patients. So every point on the x-axis is a patient. And what we plot here using three colors, black is AFib, gray is sinus, and blue is arrhythmias. It tells you for all the recordings we have in each patient, what is actually the concentration or the distribution of those three categories of cardiac rhythm. Okay, so we had a very nice spectrum. And what you see, we had patients, by the way, that were diagnosed paroxysmal AF, came in the lab, feel super good, and they were in AF during the whole multi-hour experiment. So when you see that and you do this experience and you see these patients, I mean, you really understand that we are not where we should be in terms of managing these patients and helping these people. This is an example for this specific study here again. So this is now a measurement that is not only ECG and VPG, but this is associated with illumination, with value factors that are important, distance from the phone, from the face, what type of light source, etc., etc. But as you see, we see again here that during sinus rhythm, you have very nice, periodic VPG signature, while when people are in AF here, on the bottom of this slide, you have a VPG, which is obviously very variable. This is the outcome of the app. So when people do a measurement, so it's not passive, it's active, right? When you do a health selfie, you test yourself, you do the selfie. There are a couple of outcomes from the app. If everything is okay, it tells you your heart rate, okay? That's pretty much it. If there is abnormal rhythm, again, we do not say it's AF, we say abnormal rhythm, possible atrial fibrillation. That's what we can say, not more than that. And the third, obviously, outcome is quality of the signal, right? If actually during the recording something changed, the factors are not optimal, then the technology tells you we cannot do anything with that. This is not a conclusive measurement, so basically we cannot tell anything. And it happens for many, many reasons. We did training, we did validation, so there's a little bit of AI into the algorithms that we use in the app. But what you see here, it's already the demographic in terms of two groups, gender-based for age, weight, height, BMI, systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure. Nothing to say, I believe. This is all, I think, aligned with what one would expect when you do this research in AF patients. And in this results slide here, you can see the Bland-Altman plot. I'm not sure how you're used to that. Bland-Altman plot is a method to quantify the agreement between two methods that measure the same thing. So what you have in x-axis is actually the average between heart rate between ECG and VPG, and what you have in y-axis is the difference of heart rate between ECG and VPG. And what you want to see is this cloud of data to be straight, no actually inclination, because if you have an inclination, it means there is a bias between the two methods, of one method over the other. But what you want to see also is that the confidence interval is narrow, okay? You don't want to have a very broad cloud of data because it shows you that your method is not very accurate in a sense. But what we put in those are some adjusted measurement of intra-patients and extra-patients variability, because we have multiple measurements per subject and a number of measurements that varies per subject. Statistically, you need to adjust your evaluation of variability based on those very specific structure of the data. But altogether, what I want to notice is that look at basically the mean error. For the group A, which is all the data, it's minus 1.1 beats per minute between ECG and VPG. It's getting even better when you remove the people that have pulse deficit, that are group B, and group C are the patients that have no pulse deficit and no also arrhythmias, VPC, SPACs into the ECG. This is the classification matrix based on S10 device. As you see, we have basically a pretty good values, sensitivity 95.6 in terms of detecting the AFib, specificity of 92%, positive predictive value of 88%, and negative predictive value of 96%. This is the distribution on the lower panel of those ECGs and how they were classified per group, AFib, sinus, and arrhythmias. And as you see in black, you have actually most of the people with arrhythmias. Again, arrhythmias are sinus rhythm plus VPC or PACs. You have actually most of them classified as normal rhythm. Okay, so other parameters. It's a little bit more complicated, but please follow me on that. Those are tracing that shows you on the right side the mean error of heart rate measurement between ECG and VPG across distance in the upper right corner, across illumination in the lower right corner. Okay, so what the graph shows you is that this error is actually neither affected by the distance nor the illumination. On the left side, you have actually the illumination on the x-axis, and you have the rejection rate on the y-axis. Rejection rate is when the app tells you, I cannot do the measurement, okay? And what you see is that this rejection rate increases with diminution of illumination. Makes sense, right? We use the light. If you have less light, you have less information. So what this graph shows you is that there is a graph for angle using the color scale, for distance using the color scales. It tells you that you need around 300 lux in the room to do good measurement. As a reference, if you're outside under the sun, you are at 15,000 lux, okay? So 300 lux is, you know, an office with a pretty dark illumination. So this graph shows you that, you know, it works pretty well. It doesn't work all the time, but it works pretty well. Now the challenge. The challenge is in the lower left graph. Same type of presentation. What you see here is the green curve, the blue curve and the black curve are for skin color, okay? So as I said, concentration of melanin underneath the skin is an optical barrier. And what we see here is that for people who have what we call Fitzpatrick scale, which is a measurement of the scale of the skin tone, for 5 and 6, you have really dark skin. You see that we have a very different profile. We have much more rejection in these people, okay? Meaning that for the people that have darker skin, and again, 5, 6 is really dark, but for these people, you need a lot of lights. Make sense? Okay, but that's the limitation we have this technology today, okay? And that has been a big issue, obviously, for us, for the FDA, because the FDA asked us to do specific study in people with dark skin. So we have a project now with an hospital in Chicago and one in Atlanta that serve what we call in US minority group that are African American and people with dark color. And what you see here is the results of the whole study where you have the mean error. There's a lot of things. I'm sorry, it's not very well synthesized or summarized, but look at the column called mean error and look at the different rows where we looked at difference between gender, between BMI. If you have more fat under the skin, how does it affect the things, right? So we had a group of obese, non-obese, and blood pressure obviously changed the volume of blood. But what you can see is that the error seems to be completely independent of those demographic factors. Again, that shows that it's working pretty well. On the lower table, you have sensitivity and specificity, positive predictive value and NPV for the same group, demographic group. Again, look at the values. They are pretty good. In general, above 90% in terms of sensitivity and specificity. We felt super confident with those results. It's where things become a little bit more difficult. This is now the same type of results. Look at mean error in beats per minute. And now we are looking at visual FSTs for the Fitzpatrick scale, skin color. 1 to 2 is very light skin. 5 to 6 is very dark skin. Then you have the level of illumination in the room. Then you have the distance of the phone from the face, and then the camera angle. The mean error doesn't change. All these things are not relevant to us, okay? But now look at sensitivity and specificity of the model for detecting AF. We have very good value for any illumination, distance, and camera angle. But look at the group of 5, 6, so darker skinned people. You see that our specificity, which is usually around 90%, is now 81%. It's not very different, but it is different, okay? So how do you put that in a product? How do you sell that, okay? And that's really a challenge for the technology. It's what we are working on today, where the algorithm will need to detect the skin of the color of the patients and adapt thresholds and adapt way of measuring the information to make sure that things work with the same performance. But again, it will be never working the same way for these different type of skins. So in conclusion, I would say that we develop a new concept for cardiac monitoring using video camera, which is contactless and passive. The VPG method can be used for measuring pulse rate and to detect irregular rhythm, especially AFib in patients with an history of AFib. Very important. This is not a screening device. It was not evaluated for screening population. Only Apple can do that. They spend millions of dollars doing that in the US, and that was the worst study ever. So it's a very difficult things to do a screening tool like this. So for us, it's patients that have already the diagnosis of AF. Very important. And the proposed method is not a replacement for an ECG, but a tool that is easily deployable, wearable-free, that could be used to identify individuals who would benefit from continuous ECG. Again, for AFib, you need an ECG. You need to see the electrical activity, no doubt about it. But not everyone can have an ECG. But everyone has a phone, okay? So that's where I think it's very powerful. You take your phone, you go to Google Store or Apple Store, takes 5 minutes to have the app, and then you transform your smartphone into a diagnostic medical device. That's super powerful, okay? We are not there. It's not FDA cleared, but we are working on it. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope it was interesting to you.
Thank you, Professor Jean-Phillippe, for this very nice presentation. I'd like to invite all the speakers to the table to open for discussions. So to the audience, we are open for discussion, for questions. Unfortunately, we need to leave this theater at 11:30, so we'll have 15, 20 minutes for discussion. Okay. Anyone?
Okay, thank you all for the nice presentations. I have a first question for João. So, yeah. So João, you gave us a very nice overview, and could you tell us a little bit of what are the open questions that you could try to answer in terms of your device you have, like the Langendorf perfusion device? What are the questions, open questions you could try to answer with it, and how these would like translate to the clinics?
Our research group aims to improve mechanism target of atrial fibrillation during catheter ablation. Yeah. Our goals is a translational study where we can customize the electroanatomic models to complex arrhythmias like atrial fibrillation, and then and hopefully improve it success treatment of AF. I have a question. Can I make a question to them? Sorry. I saw Olivier talking. Very nice. Thank you very much for coming along and give this nice presentation to audience, people that's online as well. The recurrent and non-recurrent groups, did you look at the clinical details of the patients, like size of the chambers, T and blood volume after ventricular beat, blood pressure, the age is the group. This is the first question in terms of recurrent and non-recurrent. And I observe that if you have a SBEB system just on front, you don't need the back. And I expect that the left atrial is more oriented to the back than to the front. And I expect that maybe back is important, since it have shown in previous study, including our group. Okay.
Okay, thank you, João. So first, I didn't mention the size of the atrium and so on, the body fat, and also the duration of the AF, because it's very important factors. In fact, I don't have in my bag, I must say, because where we published, it was mostly electrical engineering or biomedical engineering papers, not in a clinical one. But in fact, we were more interested in gaining more insight of, how to say, the perpetuation of the AF and the understanding of the depolarization pathway observed from the surface. And the result on the prediction of recurrence or not of the AF was not our main goal, I must say, of the study. So, and you're right, usually if you take into account the dimension of the chambers, sometimes it's enough just to predict the success of any treatment. So my question is, we didn't use it. And the second is that you mentioned that we didn't use back leads, but in fact we use. I mean, in our BSPM system, we have more leads on the front than on the back, but we use the full perimeter of the torso. And we didn't study on this. We didn't perform some kind of sensibility analysis, because this is a trend, the current trend, where you play with sensitivity analysis, at least to check if some leads are really needed or not. We didn't do that. And by the way, we try to use only the 12 lead system from this mapping system, because we can compute the 12 lead system with this mapping. And we got lower performance in terms of classification or prediction. But as I mentioned, the first idea was not to predict. It's just a side result, let's say. The idea was just to understand what kind of information we could exploit or extract from the BSPM. Okay.
Hi, I'm Renata from University of São Paulo, a biomedical engineer also. It's for Professor Olivier. I think your method is very interesting because it uses not only the heart rate variability, but also the vector, the shape of the vector. In your experience, how would you compare your method with like the normal measures of entropy or Fourier analysis that is done in clinical setting? Would you find it more powerful even for atrial fibrillation detection, a final way of doing it? How would you compare in power?
Yeah. In fact, in one paper that is behind this result, we computed all these features, and fortunately we got better results. But okay, we do not expect the contrary, because I promote the method, let's say, to be frank. Yeah. But we perform this, how to say, well-known feature. And what is well-known is the entropy. But usually, one question that I have is, you perform entropy lead by lead. And so the question is how to combine all these entropies extracted from each lead. So do you take the average one, or do you take the max entropy computed over the leads? And the advantage of our approach is that we use at the same time all leads to compute the multidimensional vector. So to answer correctly to your question, yes, we computed all featured, but with a lower with lower performances.
Hi, my name is Jimena. I come from the Federal University of ABC. My question is for Professor Philippe. First of all, I really like the presentation, and it was really clear. My doubts, it's more about, you talk about factors that they can affect the measurements. One of those, it was the skin color. It was not clear for me if the system, it was working, having better results with a kind of a skin, like maybe white or black, like similar to laser, that it's better for white skin, for example, or it has better results. My second question is this. The app is using, the aim of the app is be used with patients with atrial fibrillation, right? So there any kind of a relation with makeup, or they are inside the hospital and they cannot use makeup and you don't have any kind of problem with that?
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. It's a very bright question. So to respond to the first step, yes, the method, the signal is stronger when the skin is lighter, right? Again, the melanin is a barrier. It's an optical barrier that protects, right, the skin. So the way the absorption of the environment light occurs when you have a lot of melanin is much less than if you have a light skin. So it means really that the signal quality is better when you have light skin, okay? So all the performance, I'm sorry, my table were pretty large, but all the performance shows that if you are a Fitzpatrick scale 1 to 4, right? So 1 is like the people who have red and very light skin. 3 to 4 are what we call brownish skin, right? And 5 to 6 is really African dark skin in a sense. So for these people, again, the signal is much weaker. So we need to adapt the technology to first detect that this is a dark skin and adapt the technology to be more sensitive and to assess the environmental factors differently, so there's an optimal detection of the AF3. Okay, so that's it. The second question is very good because, yes, it's a problem, right? Because we all know women in general put foundation, and foundation is a big problem. Foundation, I believe, was designed for hiding the blushing of women, right, for not showing that they were blushing. So it is actually playing as also a barrier, an optical barrier. So the method, if you have foundation, does not work. We find that in an experiment where we had a charming old lady coming. It was very feminine, and she had lipstick and everything. We didn't pay too much attention. And we put the camera, and we detected nothing. There was nothing. It was just flat signal. And we realized that indeed foundation is a problem. So when you install the app and you register for your account to use the technology, there is a disclaimer. And the disclaimer tells you basically that there are things that you shouldn't do when you are monitored. So that's a great question. Foundation is a problem. Yes.
Hello, my name is Salimullah. I'm from the Federal University of ABC. Thank you for all the insightful presentations. My question is from Jean-Phillippe. You discussed about the different factors that might affect their performance, but I was curious if age could also play into those factors, because most of the training data was on people that were more than 70 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Sorry, so repeat your question. What were you wondering? Which factor? I didn't get it. Sorry.
I was wondering if age could factor into.
Yeah. So okay. So when you develop technology, medical diagnostic technology, the FDA requires that you define your population, right? You cannot just come and say it's general population. It works for thermometers and this classical type of sensor. For EF diagnostic, we decided to go the easy path, right? So that was to take patients that have already an history of EF. And as you noted in my table, this is people over 60 years old, okay? We did a lot of experiment in students at the university and asked them to put the app, and we did actually studies in nurses also in the hospital and things like that with a very large spectrum of age. The app is not for children, right? I mean, not in children and teenagers, so it's really above 21 years old. There's no factors, there's nothing we've seen that have affected our results based on age. Age is not a factor that affects anything. But it's a good question because we should ultimately have a little bit more data on that. Okay? We have limited data and not data that were captured in very well-controlled clinical studies. Did I respond to your question? Yes.
Is any other question? Yeah.
Hi, so I didn't present myself. I'm Rodrigo Vermelho dos Santos from the Federal University of Juiz de Fora. So I have two questions, one for Olivier and the other one for Jean-Phillippe. So Olivier, so when you compare the ECGI with the BSPM, were you thinking of finding something different? Because at the end, they are the same signal, just map it differently. Yeah, there's a linear relation between the two. So what's behind this comparison? And for Jean-Phillippe, is the question like, it's really interesting, very nice technology that you're developing. And as you mentioned, it's more related to hemodynamics than to the heart rhythm. Are you focusing also on other more hemodynamic related cardiac diseases like heart failure or other things that are more related to the blood flow than to the heart rhythm only? So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, in fact, if you compare the features such as TP1, P1, and so on, extracted from the recurrence analysis, we don't see big difference between BSPM and ECGI. So first, it means that ECGI do not destroy information because it could, because it's ill-posed problem to do the inverse problem. So maybe you could impact the quality of the signal. So not that much. But with the ECGI, you got rotors information and so on. And even the location that I didn't mention. And what is shown is that we perform the comparison between our features and the feature from the CGI to localize where are the rotors. And in fact, ECGI perform much more better. So what it means? It means that it's expected, let's say. So it means that it depends on your need. If you want to localize where are the rotors, you should use ECGI, definitely. But the ultimate comparison should be done with ground truth. Because, okay, ECGI transform the information in direction that you would like in some way, because you are to say you orient some results in partly. So the final conclusion should be done on ground truth. That we didn't.
Thank you again for your questions. So a couple of things. The first one, yes, we are looking at other diseases and other, I would say, health status. Any disease that affects the hemoglobin level in the blood is actually a target for us, right? Because if you take any drug to change your hemoglobin level or things like that, that could be super important. A lot of application in drug compliance, right? A lot of people are prescribed with beta blockers. They don't take their beta blockers and they reduce their life expectancy. If you take beta blockers, you have low heart rate, obviously, right? If you don't take it, basically you see sign of changes. So if you have an app that monitor your heart rate every day passively and can show you what happened over time, like a wearable type of things, then it could be used to see if people are compliant with their therapy. There are other applications that we were approached to that are not medical, and yet I want to talk about it. This is super fun. We were approached by a company that does poker online, right? Right? Exactly. So using the video, when you lie, right? When you lie or you're not honest, you have your heart rate that changes. So we were actually, we were connected to a company that says, yeah, we want to integrate your technology in poker players on the web, right? So we can monitor them and we can their heart rate. We are the same company for dating online, for application, dating online things that they said, no, we want to see how people are honest when they ask questions on all these things. Can you basically use your technology? We've never done that. It makes us laugh a lot. We never went there because we are a medical company. But that was a couple of examples. The most recent development we have, we would have never thought about it. It's super interesting because we have all this recording of face of patients, right? So we had a couple of students who came work with us and did actually face expression quantification, right? So you can segmentize basically your face and look at how the face changes over hours, minutes, days. And we found using a machine learning system that people who are in AFib have actually specific face changes that have nothing to do with hemodynamic, nothing to do with electrical activity, but somehow, maybe they feel something is wrong. We have no explanation for that, but the model is able actually to show that there's some information in how the changes in the face expression can actually give you information about the cardiac status. That's super interesting and super difficult to, I would say, convince people, specifically cardiologists and physicians, about such type of things. The most open ones say, when a couple comes, for example, for a diagnosis, for a visit with a physician, very often the male says, oh, I'm feeling fine, everything is okay, I feel okay. And the wife said, no, it doesn't feel okay. I know, right? And how do they know? They know by their behavior, by their face, by signs that are not what I would call medical signs, but human type of information that is shared by people that are together. And maybe we have a key to this kind of things in this model. So we are starting publishing these things, but it's something that was unexpected and super, super interesting.
Is any other question? No. I have a final question for
Yes.
Jean-Phillippe. With video photo plethysmography, or video plethysmography, we are, the image or the video is related to the pulse wave. How is the potential to measure other cardiovascular biomarkers like pressure?
Yes, yes. So thank you for this question. It's also something that is super important. And we have competitors, VPG Medical. There's another company. I don't like to tell their name because they are competitors, but let's do it. They are called Bina AI. It's a company in Israel. And these guys are claiming that they can do a lot of things, including blood pressure, including, I would say blood tests type of things. I think, excuse my French, I think there's a lot of bullshit in these things. I don't think we tried. Frankly, we tried. And we believe that with the quality of camera we have today in our devices, this is not something that is possible. We didn't see that. So what the people are doing to try to convince is that they take a cohort of patients that have normal blood pressure type of thing, and they basically develop a machine learning system that will predict what is the blood pressure. And frankly, I can tell for probably everyone in this group what is their blood pressure, right? You see if somebody is healthy, you can guess that and be pretty good at it. And I think it's what the machine learning does with these video games. But as soon as you try the method on hypertensive people, hypotensive people, then it's all over the place. And I have seen no demonstration, or at least things that are convincing that it works. But the technology is going there. I mean, you want ultimately that with just a video camera extract more than just this variability of cardiac things, but behavioral changes and a lot of things. There's a very nice project ongoing at the MIT called Emerald Project, where they design a radar. It's a little box, like a Wi-Fi box that you put in your house. And it's a radar system that actually analyzes what you do at home. So it measures basically the movement of the people in the home. And what is known is that when you are a chronic disease patient, you have your routine every day. And if something happens, your routine is broken, right? So their whole concept is to really monitor how people behave at home, identify routines, daily routines, and detect when this routine is broken. And this is a super good marker of something happening in the health status of these people. And they do more than that, by the way. But that's where the technology goes. I mean, the FDA now has this new center of excellence, which is called the Home as a Health Hub. I think that's the name they call it. And they are now receiving a lot of amazing technology where everything is going to be at home. With the video technology, we have been contacted by Facebook, Samsung, Google, all these big IT companies, because it's what they're doing. They put sensor in your everyday life. They put a lot in your hands already, but they want to put it everywhere and gather as much information. So some of this use of this data may be controversial, but for health application, I think there's amazing things to do with this technology.
Thank you. So we think you needed to close these seminars. So we'd like to thank our speakers and for the audience, and thank you.
Thank you.